Hey everybody, welcome to Crazy Tech Lab, and today we can finally reveal the performance numbers of Nvidia's RTX 3080 graphics card. And as you can see, I'm rolling out my beloved water cooling test bench Cosmo, which is built into a Barotech Ropolymer water cooling test bench and with Corsair Hydro X water cooling hardware, along with a Core i9 10900K graphics card and MSI MEG Z490 Ace motherboard. So today I'll be running through a whole bunch of tests, including the latest Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020 at various resolutions, and other games include Wolfenstein, Youngblood, Metro Exodus and Borderlands 3 and more. So stick around if you want to see the performance numbers in those games. I will be also looking at power and thermals later on as well. First, a big thank you to u2key.com for sponsoring today's Crazy Tech Lab video. It offers a whole bunch of software at crazy low prices, and you can get things even cheaper by using the code CAT24 to get 24% off Windows 10 Pro. You can also use CAT24 to get 24% off Office 2019 Pro. Meanwhile, CAT15 will get you 15% off Windows 10 Home. You can also use CAT15 on Office 2016 Pro as well. Finally, you can use the code CAT10 to get 10% off all the other software on its website. So once again, thank you to u2key.com for sponsoring today's video, and head over to its website for great low prices on your software. Okay, so first up then is Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, and this game is incredibly hard to run. I even downgraded the clouds to medium and also disabled all the online paraphernalia with regards to weather and traffic patterns and that kind of stuff, and still it remained very, very hard to run even on the RTX 3080. However, that graphics card was by far and away the fastest graphics card here, with the 99th percentile minimum frame rate reaching 26 frames per second. The 95th percentile was well over 30 frames per second, and the average frame rate, 99th again, was a very respectable 50 frames per second. So on the ground, things were a little choppy with that minimum 99th percentile seeming to hit at lower altitudes. So when you're taking off and landing, which are obviously critical parts of your flying experience. But once you're up in the air with that average frame rate of 50 frames per second on the 99th percentile, things were silky smooth at 2560 by 1440 at high settings, with a couple of tweaks made as I've just mentioned. Now switching it up to 4K, and this game becomes an absolute beast. Now you will probably see better frame rates if you're at altitude and flying over, just general less dense scenery, but flying out of a relatively major airport in the UK, which was London Luton. This was a challenge for my PC, despite having a Core i9 10900K overclocked to 5 GHz and the RTX 3080 at the helm, as well as some settings driven down a little as well. So that minimum 99th percentile frame rate of 13 frames per second did mean that it was pretty choppy, but as we all know now, the new Microsoft Flight Simulator is kind of untouchable at 4K with current hardware. The RTX 3090 may make things different there, but we'll just have to wait and see how that pans out. But a average frame rate, 26 frames per second of these settings, was fairly smooth at altitude once we're up in the air and away from all those buildings and stuff. The RTX 2080 Ti obviously performing reasonably well given it's such an old card, but the older cards such as the RTX 2080 Super and RTX 2080 really didn't fare well. They were choppy pretty much all of the time. Next up is Wolfenstein Youngblood, and at 2560 by 1440 with DLSS and ray tracing turned on, this game didn't really prove to be much of a challenge for any of the cards in this test. The RTX 3080 was way out in front though, with a average frame rate 99th percentile of 199 frames per second in this test, which is absolutely amazing, which is significantly faster than the RTX 2080 Ti, and both the minimum 99th percentile and the average 99th percentile are way faster than the RTX 2080 as well. Now switching it up to 4K and things are a little more challenging, but the RTX 3080 still managed an average 99th percentile of 156 frames per second, which is well over 50% faster than the RTX 2080 and significantly quicker than the RTX 2080 Ti as well. So if you're into 4K gaming in Wolfenstein Youngblood, then yeah, the RTX 3080 is an absolute beast in this game and is significantly faster than the RTX 2080 Ti as well. So next up then is Borderlands 3, and this is at high settings at 1440p and a relatively easy game to run, but again, even without RTX and various other features turned on in a game that's doesn't really support any of these features from Nvidia, there's still a massive gain with the RTX 3080, which is miles faster than the RTX 2080 Ti, and well, it's a huge amount quicker than the RTX 2080 as well. And switching up to 4K now, and again the RTX 3080 performed excellently in this test, and in fact it was getting on for twice as fast as the RTX 2080 and significantly faster than the RTX 20 Ti as well. So switching it up to Far Cry New Dawn now, and at ultra settings at 1440p, the RTX 3080 was once again significantly ahead, although not by a huge amount over the RTX 2080 Ti, but significantly quicker than the RTX 2080 and RTX 2080 Super. Moving up to 4K, and once again the RTX 3080 leaps ahead a little bit and is again significantly quicker than the RTX 2080 Ti and miles faster than the RTX 2080, with an average 99th percentile of 100 frames per second versus just 67 frames per second for the RTX 2080. Moving on to Metro Exodus now then, and at 1440p with Hairworks off and RTX features disabled, the RTX 3080 managed an average 99th percentile of 110 frames per second, which is miles ahead of the RTX 2080 again, and is significantly quicker than the RTX 2080. So all round an excellent result for the RTX 3080 in this game at these settings. Switching RTX on with a DLSS and ray tracing enabled, then we see a slight drop back with the RTX 2080 Super and RTX 2080, but in general things hold their place. Moving up to 4K, and this becomes a pretty tricky game to play, but again the RTX 3080 was miles ahead of the RTX 2080 Ti with an average 99th percentile of 71 frames per second versus just 55 frames per second for the RTX 2080 Ti, and the RTX 2080, well, it languishes down there with just a 43 frames per second 99th percentile. The last Metro Exodus test then is at 4K with Hairworks off again, but this time RTX enabled, so DLSS and ray tracing are enabled, and the RTX 3080 gained some performance with DLSS, but obviously with ray tracing enabled that takes a hit, so it's 45 frames per second on the minimum 99th percentile and 70 frames per second on the average 99th percentile, which once again, familiar story, miles ahead of the RTX 2080 Ti and significantly quicker than the RTX 2080. Our next game is Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and at the highest settings with 1440p resolution enabled, the RTX 3080 managed an average 99th percentile of 141 frames per second, which is nearly, well, it's over 50 frames per second faster than the RTX 2080, which languished down in last place with an average 99th percentile of 89 frames per second. And this result was also significantly quicker than the RTX 2080 Ti, which managed an average 99th percentile of just 114 versus the RTX 3080's 141 frames per second. Moving up to 4K in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and the RTX 3080 takes a bit of a leap forwards and is getting on for double the performance in this benchmark of the RTX 2080, which is amazing. And the RTX 2080 Ti managed an average 99th percentile of 61 frames per second, and that compares to 82 frames per second for the RTX 3080. Now turning on RTX features such as DLSS and ray tracing, and the frame rates take a bit of a dive, but once again the RTX 3080 outperforms every other card by miles, and again we're looking at near double the performance of the RTX 2080 too. So Nvidia's claims that you'll see up to double the performance here versus the RTX 2080 seemed to be well founded. Finally then, we're looking at the power consumption, and we knew that the RTX 3080 was going to draw a little more power, but given that we're seeing double the performance of the RTX 2080 in some benchmarks or close to it, the fact that it's drawing barely more than 100 watts more than that card means that you're certainly not doubling the power draw for that extra performance. So the peak power draw, which was in Metro Exodus with RTX enabled and at 4K resolution, was 480 watts. So again, your power supply, if you're running something that's 500 to 600 watts, you're going to need an upgrade for this graphics card. Admittedly, I was using a Core i9 10900K, which is not known for being the most power frugal CPU out there, but even so, you're going to need at least a 750 watt power supply just to ensure that your power supply isn't running close to its maximum output and having its fan spinning all the time, creating more noise. So I would suggest something in the region of 800 watt plus for RTX 3080 owners, just to give yourself that bit of extra headroom. And also I should mention that my CPU is overclocked. It's overclocked to 5 gigahertz as well. So if you're using a 7nm Ryzen CPU, for example, with this graphics card, you'll probably get a fair amount lower on the power draw from the wall. But 481 watts is easily dealt with most power supplies that most people own out there, so long as you're not dealing with anything that's significantly lower than 600 watts. Finally then, we come to the PCI Express 4.0 versus 3.0 challenge, and this is basically swapping from PCI Express 4.0 to 3.0 on an AMD X570 motherboard using a Ryzen 9 3950X, so as fast as I can get it basically for AMD. And what we see here is very little difference actually, at least in Shadow of the Tomb Raider at various settings between those two modes. So basically what I did here is I opted for an Intel system, given that in every game that I've tried, there hasn't really been much of a difference between PCI Express 3.0 and PCI Express 4.0. Also, you have to consider that hardly anybody out there, or in terms of a very, very small minority, have PCI Express 4.0, and that's likely to be the case for some time. So to be more representative of what the vast majority of people out there would see if they dropped an RTX 3080 into their graphics card, I have gone with an Intel system, and which is based on PCI Express 3.0. That's not to downplay the features or the extra bandwidth and speed that PCI Express 4.0 will offer, but Nvidia itself has told me that that's kind of come more into its own with RTX IO, which is a new feature of the RTX 3000 series that we'll be seeing in the near future. But again, it's not something that you need to worry about too much at the moment if you're just looking for an upgrade for your gaming system. So here, as we can see, very little difference between the two different settings, flitting from one to the other on an AMD X570 system with a Ryzen 9 3950X at the helm. Now switching to Metro, and at 1440, we did see a slight drop in the minimum 99th percentile, moving from PCI Express 4.0 to 3.0, but overall, again, it's really not worth worrying about. And as we've seen, if you go for an Intel system, if you're looking to maximize your frame rates, you will see far more benefit going for something like a Core i5 10600K or Core i9 10900K like I've used in this system, because we know that those CPUs are the top dogs in game. So if you're trying to maximize your performance, it's not really worth going for PCI Express 4.0, at least at the moment, and at least in these two games. Unfortunately, given everything else that I've been doing, I haven't had a chance to test more games in this with PCI Express 4.0 versus 3.0, but it'd be worth looking at maybe other reviewers out there to see if they've done more testing here and if there are some specific titles that see more performance. So what do we make of Nvidia's RTX 3080 then? Well, it's a bit of a beast, isn't it? It's significantly faster than the RTX 2080 Ti in every single game test that I did here today, and it's getting on for double the performance of the RTX 2080, making both those cards rather redundant at their current prices. However, this does rely on the fact that the RTX 3080 does need to enter the market at Nvidia's price of $699. Whether or not that's the case, we'll have to wait and see, but hopefully stock will be there and the pricing will be right as well. But hopefully we'll also see some slightly cheaper options from partner cards, which are usually a bit cheaper than the Founders Edition card that I've been looking at here. I'd like to thank Nvidia for sending me the sample for this review, and don't forget to subscribe to Crazy Tech Lab for more review videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll catch you soon.